Namaste. Welcome to my podcast. Today we address the issue of nuclear power. I personally find this issue very interesting. It is one of those things that I'm not very clear about myself, simply because there are too many unanswered questions. Maybe they are unanswered according to me, and they're obvious if you are someone who's involved in that field, but at least how I look at it, I found that I did not know a lot of things. So I decided I had to do a podcast on this where I actually get clarity on the issues myself, and in the process, the listeners also get the same clarity. I'm very glad that Jaideep Prabhu agreed to come on my podcast. Jaideep is currently working on his dissertation on Indian nuclear weapons policy. In the meantime, he's also a consulting editor at Swarajya and has written in various publications in India and abroad on matters of nuclear policy, foreign relations, international law, and political philosophy. Also, something very interesting, Jaideep is a voracious reader. If you are a regular on Swarajya, you'll see a lot of book reviews by Jaideep. And another secret thing about Jaideep has an unending love for some videos that I post on Facebook. He always denies that, but let me tell you, he loves those videos and we'll get to them eventually too. So Jaideep, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kushal. Thank you very much. Let me clarify here that the reason I like your videos is because it taught me a lot of things, your videos, such as how to use the block button or mute button.
How dare you? So Jaideep, now this is a serious subject. So I want to start with a bit of a historical context. So I know this is going to sound very, basic for someone who's deeply involved in the subject, but I have to ask this. So what is nuclear energy? How does a nuclear power plant work? Like, can you give that basic description first?
Yeah, those are two very big questions. So let me handle them bit by bit and just stop me when you want some more clarity.
Sure.
Now, the way this whole nuclear thing works is that in the 1930s, somebody realized, by this time, they had realized that the atom can disintegrate, undergo fission and that sort of stuff. And so the concept of chain reaction comes up in the mid-30s, in 1936, I think. And then in 1939, it is proven that a chain reaction can occur and uranium can do it. And they realize there's a massive release of energy, according to the famous equation E equals mc squared. And somebody realized that this could make a very powerful bomb. Now, this is the beginning of nuclear energy in any form whatsoever as a weapon, not as a solution to man's energy needs. People said, hey, look, we can also make energy from this, but nobody had a clue as to how to do this. They built a reactor during the Manhattan Project in the United States, but the purpose was to make bombs, not electricity. However, there were some very smart physicists, a couple of them in India also, who suggested that this can be made to generate electricity. So that is the beginning of the nuclear age, through weapons and not through power. After the war, these academic interests, which were less urgent during World War II, came to the fore, and people said this is something we can do. And looking at the amount of energy that uranium could generate, because the energy density is enormously high, right? It's like something like 20,000 tons of coal is equal to like a kilogram of uranium or something. It's like substantial, it's massively, exponentially larger, the volume. So they said this can really help. Plus the fact that it doesn't generate the soot and the sort of problems that today we don't have when we visit Europe or America. But this is the dirty air and all was a lot more common in the 20s and 30s, for example, than it is today. So they said, let us experiment with this. So this is the history of how power reactors came to be. The first power reactor was set up in the Soviet Union, and the first reactor that was commercial, attached to commercial lines and set up that way was in the United States. This was around about the late 50s, the second half of the 1950s. So this is the very brief history. We can get into any parts you are more interested in. Now, in terms of how does it generate power? Essentially, a nuclear plant is just a fancy way of boiling water. The steam will turn the turbines and, the usual power plant process. Now,
Okay.
What is the difference between burning coal to generate steam versus using uranium, you might ask. The difference is that uranium being radioactive, we have to be a lot more careful. There are health elements we have to consider. There's going to be high pressure, high temperature. Depending on the reactor design, again, people will say like a molten salt reactors, has high temperature but not high pressure. There's a lot of technicalities. I'm trying to give you the very generic sort of answer here.
Okay.
But there'll be, usually there are questions of high pressure, corrosion, the strength of materials which have to resist radiation for many years. The fuel, once it's, some of these fuels, for example, yellow cake, uranium oxide, you can hold it in your hand, nothing's going to happen to you. But once it goes through a reactor and comes out, that stuff can be pretty dangerous, lethal, in fact. So
Okay.
all these things have to be considered, and that is what makes nuclear power plants a little more expensive, perhaps, because we have to we cannot compromise safety. In essence, however, the basic thing is you put in the fuel and you make the uranium undergo fission. And in the fission, there is heat generation, of course. That heat is taken out of the reactor core via a coolant, which is sometimes water, sometimes can be something else, depending on how much heat you want to transfer. That coefficient is important. This goes into reactor design again. And that heat will then boil the water, which will turn the turbines, and you have steam like any other nuclear plant.
All right. Now, in this, within the framework of nuclear technology, isn't there one side which is the standard way the West has done it, and isn't there something that the Indians are doing which is slightly different? And in fact, I had read an article where it was saying that the Indian technology is actually kind of good and interesting, but it has not been pushed as much. So, can you explain a bit of that?
Yeah, see, essentially, basically ultimately comes down to the same basic physics principles, which is fission. Okay, and how you do it is different. For example, you would have, if you read about nuclear reactors, you'll hear terms like light water reactors, heavy water reactors, molten salt reactors, and these are slightly different engineering solutions to achieve the same physics process. The light water reactor, for example, what it does, see, in a reactor, when you're undergoing, making uranium undergo fission, one thing you have is a moderator to control the rate of the reaction. You don't want in a bomb, the reaction can just go crazy and it doesn't matter. You want it to go crazy because you want a big explosion. In a reactor, you want to control that fission. So you have a moderator which will absorb the neutrons, for example. So the rate of the further fissions will be reduced or increased depending on the power you want to generate, amount of fission you want the fuel to undergo. So that will change. The second thing is, what is the end product? For example, light water reactors are not very good at creating plutonium in the spent fuel, whereas heavy water reactors are. Heavy water reactor is deuterium oxide, as whereas it's a different isotope of hydrogen. It's basically water, but it's different that way. So these are the basic reactor design issues. Now, what happens is with light water, you have to have slightly more enriched uranium, because you can't put uranium there and expect it to undergo fission. It doesn't happen that way. So what you do is you enrich uranium. For power reactors, worldwide light water reactors, the enrichment is for land-based power reactors, the general enrichment is between 1.5 and 3% of the uranium. So that means that much impurities are removed. That means there's more atoms that can undergo fission, slightly more, and that is put in the reactor. And the moderation has to be less, because the light water reactor is not that good a moderator, so you are enriching it. Now India says, okay, look, this enriching uranium is a very expensive process. How can we get the uranium-238 to a fission? So for that, what they need is a better moderator. Now, basically what happens is, when fission happens, these neutrons fly out at very fast speeds. Many times, most of these neutrons will escape unless you sort of create some sort of environment wherein they bounce off other atoms and they're retained within the core for as long as possible. A light water reactor is not as good at that, when it is not required, because the fuel they use is enriched. So there are more neutrons as it is. Now, in the Indian design and the Canadian design, I should also say, actually, the heavy water reactors, these the uranium does not need to be enriched, which means you save cost, obviously, but you have to make heavy water, which is again more expensive than using regular water. Now, what heavy water does, it's a better moderator, meaning the size of the heavy water the molecules are going to be a little bigger than the light water molecules.
All right.
So that it makes it easier for the heavy water to retain more neutrons within the flux area, as they call it, in the core. So that means more fission can be undergone. So these are the sort of technical differences in terms of rate of fission and what kind of fuel you use. Now these moderators can be different. Like the French were experimenting with graphite reactors, for example. So I mean these things basically, as long as it works, you can put anything you want in there. For example, if you want to take heat out, for example, metal is a better conductor, right? So it can absorb more heat from the core. So if you can put, instead of water, you can put liquid sodium to absorb the heat. That will allow better heat transfer in a reactor. The problem with liquid sodium is it's corrosive. So all these elements you have to balance, how corrosive it is, how much enrichment the fuel has, what kind of moderation is required for that fuel. So these are the small differences between these reactors. Now Eastern, I don't think it's like a Western way versus an Eastern way. There's nothing inherently Indian about a heavy water reactor. In fact, we got the technology from the Canadians.
All right.
These are decisions that are made on the economics of the day. These are decisions that are made on the materials available at the day. In the mid to late 50s, when India was interested in getting this technology from Canada, we decided that it is too expensive to enrich uranium, and this technology was not easily available. In fact, you will notice even now that enrichment and reprocessing technology is very tightly controlled by the nuclear suppliers group. So for these reasons, we went in for a certain design. In India, there were other conditions also that influenced us. One was that we wanted to keep a backdoor open to manufacture nuclear weapons, and the plutonium bomb was the easier bomb to make. A little more complicated in design perhaps, but definitely plutonium was easier to get from the Indian perspective than uranium. That is one thing. But more importantly to our power project was that Homi Bhabha, the founder of the Indian nuclear program, had a 3-stage process. You must have, anybody in India who's vaguely interested in nuclear energy will have heard of this. What you do is, you have the first phase of heavy water reactors. You take the fuel out. Once it's gone through that, put it in a fast breeder reactor, which will generate more plutonium, and that in the fast breeders. And then finally, you put into a third stage along with thorium. And what will happen is the thorium will transmute into uranium, and it will create fission, basically. So these are 3 phases, and what will happen is there's a more efficient use of energy in these by using the fuel this way, and we should have energy for like over 1,000 years, aram se.
Okay, so one more thing I just wanted, this is for personal clarity. Wasn't this whole thing about the thorium thingy or whatever, please pardon me, I'm very ignorant about this subject. Wasn't the whole idea that the Indian method was kind of better because it would lead to more yield and less wastage or something of that sort?
Yes, definitely. But let us be very clear. The thorium idea, although Bhabha had it nailed in 1954, nailed in the sense he had it down on paper vaguely, like this is how we want to do it. Maybe not in terms of equations, but he had the basic idea out. This idea you will see even in the West. There has been thorium research. In fact, in the 60s, in the late 60s, the Americans shut down their reactors where they were experimenting with molten salt and use of thorium and such things. Now, in India, the thing is we have like the second largest or the largest supply of thorium in the world. So thorium came to us naturally. For the United States, they don't have those constraints in terms of access to uranium and all that. Secondly, the United States was involved in a Cold War. So the standard history of this, and there is some new research that has argued against this, but it is not yet mainstream. It has not yet been vetted by the community properly. But nonetheless, the standard argument right now is that the reason the Americans preferred a certain kind of reactor was their goal was to maximize the production of uranium and plutonium for their nuclear bombs. And as you know, the Americans went a little crazy with the manufacture of nuclear weapons. At the peak of the Cold War, they had somewhere between 25 and 30,000 warheads.
Yeah, that was.
In comparison, India today has about 120, just to put the scale there.
We're very Gandhian.
No, because see, between the Soviet Union and the United States, they had more than 95% of the total warheads in the world. Even China has about 200, 250. France has about 275. So I'm saying is these guys went really crazy. It's not just a magnitude or two more.
Yeah, वो कई बार लोग जज्बाती हो जाते हैं जैसे बोल. Now I wanna. So this was the first part, and I'm glad we've cleared a lot of basics. Now I want to divide the podcast into two parts. The first, now I want to address is the cost factor with nuclear power. So obviously now you have the standard coal power plants in India or any kind of fossil fuel that we have. Now, what is the comparison vis-a-vis? And obviously we have the current Prime Minister's favorite project, which is solar power. And we are pushing solar power in a big way. So where does nuclear power stand in terms of a pure cost benefit analysis? First, in comparison to solar, with the subsidies for solar and without the subsidies for solar. So can you explain a bit of that?
Yeah, there are multiple facets to that question, like the previous question you asked also. Let's start with the first point, cost. Now, how do you calculate cost? That's the first question I have to ask you. In the sense, see, with nuclear, what happens is when we calculate cost, we calculate not only the setting up of the plant and the fuel and the decommissioning, and all these things are factored into the price of a nuclear power plant. There's a certain percentage of the your utility bill that goes towards decommissioning. They'll say, okay, we are going to say if it costs 100 rupees for this much energy, out of that 2 rupees will be kept for decommissioning when the plant is old and we are shutting it down, so we can shut it down safely. This much will have to go towards the financing, and so this division is there.
Yeah.
Now, in nuclear power, the calculations are made including decommissioning. Okay. In coal, there is no such a decommissioning issue. Now, coal causes other problems for which they have not been made to pay, which is one of the arguments the nuclear industry will point out anytime you ask them. But nuclear has to be careful. Nuclear needs to have liability and all these things now. For coal, what is the other thing they have to pay? They don't have to pay for. It is public health. When you have emissions and when those emissions cause health problems, they are not paying the bills. Now, if the coal power plants were made to pay for the medical premium of these people or the bills of these people, I think the price of coal could also go up quite a bit. So calculating cost becomes very tricky this is one reason. The second thing is with nuclear, unlike coal or gas or solar and whatever else sources you have, hydro, whatever, the nature of the cost distribution is different. In that, like 90% or more of the nuclear power plant costs are upfront. For example, let's say you set up a coal plant and every month you want to buy 1,000 tons or whatever of coal. You have to keep buying and supplying your plant, and a coal plant normally lasts for say about 30 years or so roughly. Now, a nuclear plant, that's not the thing. 90% or more of the cost goes right up front because the level of safety for each component in a reactor is exceptionally high. In fact, we just call it nuclear grade. You have steel, it's nuclear grade steel, which means it has to be of a certain quality, certain amount of impurities not acceptable, which most of the places nobody cares. So for these reasons, the costs become a little higher that way. Now, the advantage of this is 90% of the cost is down, fine. But uranium, for example, the price can quadruple and it will barely have a dent on your utility bills. Because the price of the fuel is hardly anything in your utility. When you really look at all the other costs, uranium doesn't have a big deal. Whereas for coal, the price fluctuations will have a big effect. For oil, definitely you've seen a massive effect, say 10 years ago or something, or 12 years ago before the Iraq war, when oil was at I don't know what is it, like it had dropped down to like $8 a barrel or something. Compare that to the peak of 140. Obviously, there's going to be huge difference in terms of transportation, energy, all kinds of things, right? Nuclear power doesn't have that issue. So that's another thing. Another thing about cost, I'll say, that complicates matters is that unfortunately the way nuclear energy has evolved is that there is no standard reactor where we can say, okay, you go to a company, they have one on the shelf and they'll say, "Ha, bhai, this is $3 billion." There is no such thing. For the simple reason, if I go and say I want a nuclear reactor, assuming I have all the permissions and all that, of course, they will say, okay, where do you want to build it? And if I have the land, they'll go analyze the land. They look at the terrain, they look at the rainfall, they look at the water table, they look at the rivers in the area, the flora, the fauna, they look at the earthquake, all these things. And they'll say, okay, if you're putting up a plant in Madras or near Madras, they'll say, yeah, tsunamis can be a problem. We need to build this to make sure your reactor is safe. Whereas if I go and put up a plant in, say, near Indore, for example, you don't need tsunami protection there. You'll need something else there. You'll need, maybe for the sake of argument, let's say Jaitapur, for example, they were looking at earthquake protection, earthquake dampeners. Now, earthquake dampeners might not be as required in Madras. So each reactor is sort of custom built to the site. Now, on one side, you can have like 8 reactors, 10 reactors, whatever you want, obviously. But those reactors are specific to the site. Now, what this does is because they're custom made, you don't have that economy of scale. You don't have that factory line sort of economy. You know what I mean? So that also raises costs, but it also makes it difficult for us to say this is what a reactor costs default. So when you ask me what does a reactor cost, I can say yes, it is more expensive upfront, but over its life, because see, reactors can easily function for 60 years, and the new generation reactors they are saying that at 60 years, if you have a refurbishment, midlife refurbishment, you can have the reactor function for up to 100 years. 100 years means you will need basically 4 coal plants will have to be built. Okay, so that also you have to factor in. Now, when you compare this with solar, for example, solar power plants also last about not more than 20 years, I would say roughly. So that will be like 5 solar power plants you'll have to build. Okay, so that is cost. It's a very complicated thing. There's no fixed answer. We have to talk in specifics. The next thing you said, okay, how does it fit into the Indian nuclear energy picture? See, that is a policy question. That is what they decide, and I personally think that India should have, like France, about 80 to 90% nuclear power as its base load, and that will help a lot in terms of for many reasons. But anyway, now with each energy there are going to be advantages and disadvantages. Nuclear cost is the first thing. The second thing is with coal, it's going to be dirty. With gas and oil, we're importing it, so we'll have no energy security. And price fluctuations can really change things. As you know, one small war in the Middle East, and that's the end of your energy budget, right? Yeah. Now, it comes to solar, which is a lot of excitement in India for some reason. Now, the experience, I don't want to say research, at this point I can say experience shows that solar power is problematic for grids when it comes above a certain percentage. We have seen this in Australia, we've seen this in Germany, we've seen this in many places. It has been modeled also, obviously, even before it happened. Because grid engineers call it dirty power because the fluctuations are many. One cloud passes over your solar power plant and there's a quick fluctuation. So rain, anything, all these fluctuations, the power is seen as dirty because the frequency fluctuates a lot also. So the grid has to be better. That's one issue with solar. And so, I feel a little nervous about it. The second thing is, the question is, what do you do when it is not sunny, when it is raining or when it is night, it might not rain every day of the year, but it will certainly be night part of the day, every single day of the year. India is blessed with more sunshine than Norway, I agree. But even in India, we have night. We can't escape that fact. Yeah. So that is one thing. So people say, okay, you can do storage. But if you ask the solar companies to calculate the price of storage, their rates will go up. Right now, they're getting away with it because what they're saying is, whenever we have energy, all the rest of you should back off. We will dump all the energy onto the grid. And when we don't have energy, you guys can do what you want. Meaning, we are giving them priority. In a way, the grid is subsidizing their storage costs. And for that, the market has to change. The way power is bought and sold has to change for them alone. Whereas normally what used to happen is they'll tell the hydro guy, okay, I need 16 megawatts from you. 160 megawatts from you. I need, 800 megawatts from the nuclear guy. I need 500 megawatts from the coal guy, and that's done. And you can ramp up and down with gas, which is very quick, depending on peak and base load sort of requirements. By the way, if I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. If there is anything technical, please stop and ask me immediately. Yeah.
No. This is quite clear.
Okay, good. So with solar, that is another problem I see. Now, does that mean solar has no place? No, I don't think so. I think solar has a place. I just feel very uncomfortable when it's connected to the grid. If you want to save on your electricity bills and you're willing to put, say 2 lakhs down and put solar panels on your roof and reduce your bills, that's good. I'm not stopping you. And rooftop energy in that sense, I think is, definitely something that people can investigate on a case by case basis. In some places it doesn't make sense. In some places it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, let us be very clear that, when people say there's, no pollution, the manufacturing of solar panels is very polluting. Solar panel takes a lot of land, and you can't go into the desert and put it up there in the middle of nowhere because it's difficult to access that. There'll be transmission costs and all that. Another thing is solar panels have to be very clean. If you have dirty panels, and in India there's a lot of dust and other particles in the air, you have to keep these panels clean. Because if you don't keep it clean, the efficiency goes on. As it is, the solar panels, the most efficient, the highest level of efficiency you're still having, you're not hitting 30% consistently, So most of these panels are like at 20, 25%, maybe 30 at the best. Whereas, others like hydro and nuclear and coal and all these, they can very easily give you any level of efficiency. Depending on the need, they can give you 90, 95, 98%. The record-breaking reactor number 5 in Rajasthan, for example, was working at 97, 98% just before they took it offline. After it had worked for more than 2 years non-stop. So these are the issues when it comes when you ask me what about cost and what do you say about subsidies and all that. I think subsidies are I'm not against subsidies completely, because I think especially when it comes to infrastructure, the government has a big role to play. At the same time, I think those subsidies should be targeted to energies that can actually solve the problem and are not a fad. In my opinion, solar cannot be a government policy. They can at most encourage individuals, depending on their needs, to install in their houses or not. Or buildings, communities can do it that way.
All right, now on to the main question, which is always going to be associated with solar. That is the fear psychosis. When I say fear psychosis, obviously we have 3 major incidents in the history of solar power that anybody who reads a basic newspaper knows. One is Chernobyl, one is Fukushima, and one is your 3 Mile Island incident. Now, first I want you to explain what exactly happened in those places and how much of the cost associated with solar is actually because of the fear psychosis associated with the technology itself.
Well, see, I wish people were as scared of solar as you say, but I think they're more scared of nuclear than solar. You kept saying solar power just now, but
Oh, sorry. Yeah, nuclear. Sorry.
yeah.
See, that's how much I hate nuclear. I was promoting solar power in between that too.
So, okay. I think this is the crux of the podcast. This is the question everybody will want to know about. There are a couple of. Let's start with the 3 incidents you give, and then we'll get into the science as well as the engineering. The 3 Mile Island, basically there was a partial meltdown of the core because the cooling stopped at one of the units. What had happened was that they had, I think, 3 generators or something. The first one failed. The second one, which was supposed to be backup, also didn't work. The third one kicked in or something, but there was a bit of a problem there. Now, when it comes to nuclear power plants, because our standards are so high, even a bit of a problem is considered a very serious thing, and we don't want any even the slightest bit of damage. Now, 3 Mile Island is seen as a big scare thing, like things could have gone wrong. Yeah, it could have, perhaps, but the point is that nothing did, and that is because of good nuclear plant design. We know that if you have only, say, one generator to power the cooling pumps, to pump in the water into the reactor core to take the heat out, right? Basically, it might fail. One generator could fail, so you have a second one. So in case that in nuclear power plants, we'll say, okay, we'll have 4, not just 1 extra. We'll have 3 extra, just in case. That is the way we work with the safety mechanism. Now, here you have to understand. This goes to cost, by the way, to the previous question, is that having more backup is not necessarily a better thing. For example, if you have more backup, you have to ensure that the backup is in functioning condition. I can buy 10 generators as backup, but the problem is if I don't use them on a day-to-day basis and one day the emergency strikes and suddenly I turn the generator on, it's not working because I've not used it for 10 years. That is a problem. So the cost goes up because of this. So this is one of the issues people have with these fear mongering that raises the cost of safety through unnecessary precautions. So there has to be safety, but not too much also. It has to be a nice balance there. Now, back to the specifics at hand. 3 Mile Island, there is not a single person died. There was no major release of radiation because if, there was some evacuation or something, whatever. But nonetheless, there was no major release of radiation, and no casualties were there. That's one thing. In Chernobyl, what happened? Chernobyl is a very special case because Chernobyl is the only reactor that I know of that actually worked without having what do you call a shield. Basically all reactors have that, the characteristic dome around them, right, to contain the radiation and all that. Now Chernobyl, the RBMK type reactor the Soviets had, for whatever reason, did not have that. Don't ask me why. And they were warned while they were building it, and they have discontinued that since. That's another thing. And for all the problems with the RBMK in terms of like safety, it actually worked fairly well except for that one example, Chernobyl. Now Chernobyl mein kya hua? These guys were, see, the story that is not told is that these people got drunk at the stations. There's another problem there was that there were experiments being run as most reactors, there are experiments being run constantly to understand how the reactor works and how to make it more efficient and all that. And during this, what happened was there was too much, the moderator basically was reduced to a point where it could not control the fission reaction. Because let us say both of us are running experiments on it. I take out some moderator to see what happens. The control rods, I take one out or two out. You don't know that I have taken out 2 rods. You take out 2 more and suddenly the reactor goes crazy. The other thing is the design was flawed. It's because of a positive void coefficient. Now that's fancy terminology for basically saying is when the temperature goes up, the fission rate increases, basically, right? So that means the fission rate increase means it gets hotter, and that creates a cycle there. The temperature goes up, there's more fission means more heat, so it gets hotter, so there's even more fission, and it spirals out of control that way. No reactor today has that. They all have negative void coefficients. The question is how negative it can be. So there's a design issue there also. And that went wrong. There were experiments being run, these people were drunk on the job, and that is what happened. Now, despite all this, and despite Chernobyl being the worst nuclear accident, there's a massive radiation, exposure, and the casualty list was 28 at that time. In 84, 86, whatever, I forget now, in April. Now, since then, people who have died of radiation, I think the number according to UNSCEAR is something like 64 or 70 or something. It is not in the millions or whatever people might be afraid of. And that is by far the worst accident that has happened in nuclear. Now, the issue is here again, what we will say is that radiation, the casualties need not have been that high even. What happened is when the explosion happened, the Soviet Union for a multiple number of days denied that anything had gone wrong. The Americans said, look, we know something is going wrong. Then what happened is the Swedes, they detected the radiation, and then the Soviets said, yeah, you're right, we have a problem. Had they acted instantly the moment something went wrong, even that death count could have been perhaps far less. Now, the way this happens is that there's a certain form of iodine which is more radioactive that gets into the grass, and then the cows eat it and goes into the milk, and when the milk is consumed by the children, they get thyroid cancer. That's basically how this happens. Now, if they had given pills out, there are certain pills you can buy. What it does is these are iodine pills which basically clog all the receptors in your thyroid, whatever you want to call it, with a different isotope of iodine. So the radioactive isotope cannot be received by the body, just goes through. Is it safe? I mean, yeah, I wouldn't advise you to do that for weight loss or something, but nonetheless, it will keep you alive and it will keep you safe. It will not cause cancer. It will not kill you if you take all these precautions. And again, remember, this is the worst worst disaster nuclear, and the casualty rate, even including the post-explosion prolonged cancer and death, is about that much. And the number of people that suffered from it is depends which estimates you use, but the highest estimates that I have seen from credible sources is still around about 4,500. That is Chernobyl. Fukushima, what happened? Fukushima, actually nothing happened. There's a huge tsunami. The water got into the generators, and the generators couldn't keep the coolant pumping into the reactor core. So the reactor got heated, and there's a meltdown. Again, Fukushima has, just like 3 Mile Island, has 0 deaths due to radiation. What happened? The reactor melted, yes, and and there was a problem. And the reason we say it is a problem is because in 2008, this scenario was planned for. Somebody said, look, this could happen, and the company decided to neglect it. In hindsight, that looks fantastic. Like, look, these guys told you that something will go wrong, and it did not, and you guys didn't take care of it. But on the other side, there are a lot of these sort of safety sort of analyses, and you can't take every one of them very seriously. Otherwise, you'll never do anything in life. What the company would have said is, yes, that is true. I've heard these analyses, for the last 30, 40, 50 years. I've never seen a tsunami that big happen. It happens once in a century. So, what are the chances of this happening? And it was unfortunate for them that it did happen the way it happened. So, Fukushima also, it was not the failure of nuclear technology. It was the problem was the water got into the generators, which knocked out the coolant pumps. So this is where Fukushima goes. Now what has happened is the casualties at Fukushima, many of them are due to tsunamis. There's been a lot of studies that some of the casualties and there's all these issues have been there at Fukushima. More of it has been caused by the evacuation. There's been depression among many families. I mean mentally I'm talking about, not economic alone. And now there's a lot of data coming out from Japan itself where they're saying maybe the evacuation was not really necessary. So the fear mongering that was engaged in by irresponsible elements, NGOs, has compounded the tragedy of Fukushima more than it had to be. The tsunami was bad enough; they added a nuclear element to it. So that is the Fukushima. Now that is what happened at the 3 places. Now let us get to radiation and the fear itself. What is the fear? See, the fear is basically that, it's something that you can't see, you don't know what's happening, you're exposed to it, and, it can kill you. But that fear really means nothing because radiation is everywhere as it is. The standard example everybody gives you is there are beaches in Kerala, in Brazil, or Iran, for example, where the radiation is something like 20, 30, 40 times higher than what is recommended by the health authorities. And there are people who live there, there are people who are sitting there on that radioactive sand in swimming trunks, and nothing happens to them. The people have lived there for years and there's no higher rate of cancer among those populations. That's the first thing you have to understand. Second thing is radiation is again of different types. You have alpha, beta, gamma radiation. Each of them is different. They have different kinds of problems and they have different reasons to fear and different reasons not to be afraid also. Some things affect certain kind of radiation and others don't. The alpha radiation, the particles are bigger. A piece of paper can stop most alpha radiation. So if the reactor has a radiation leak, for example, all you have to do is have a piece of paper in front of you that will stop basically the alpha radiation. Beta radiation, you might need something a little thicker, and gamma radiation is going to be the toughest. You're going to have at least a few meters of concrete perhaps. So this is one thing. Now radiation, again, it depends on how it reacts to your body, which organ it hits, it matters. The kidney will respond differently to the lung, it will respond differently to the skin. It also depends on the dose. How much you're getting for how long is something else you have to worry about. If it's one short, quick burst, it doesn't really matter that much. When you go for an X-ray or when you're flying in an aeroplane, you are exposed to radiation there also. Yeah. But we don't complain about that. So this is something else. It depends on your body weight also, because that also is something else you have to consider. A small person, a child, might be 25 kilos or something. The radiation of a certain amount will affect him much more than a man who is like 85, 90 kilos, 6 feet and 85, 90 kilos. That is something else you have to keep in mind. All these factors are there. So to say radiation is bad doesn't make sense. Now this is coming from a theory that's called the linear no threshold theory, which was expounded in the mid-40s. And basically, just to play it safe, what they said is any radiation is bad. But this is, remember, in the mid-40s, we didn't know that much about radiation and how these things work. Nobody had ever envisioned a power reactor. The bomb itself was, brand new and highly classified. Today, 8-9 countries have it. So it was a different era. They didn't want to take a risk. But more and more research has proven that radiation is not nearly as harmful as these authorities make it out to be. The other thing about radiation safety limits I have to point out is that the way these limits are set up is if the medical community decides that X is the amount of radiation you can handle per day, for example, the safety limit they'll say is X by 100. So 1/100th of that is a safety limit. So actually, if they say the limit is say 5, you can go up to 500, for example. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yep.
so when people say, oh, the limit was 5, he's exposed to 10. Yeah, okay, fine. Doesn't really matter. So that is another element about radiation and what kind of fears it causes. It's because we don't know what we think. All radiation is bad. It is not. That's the simple thing. If you think all radiation is bad, you should not eat bananas. Bananas have radiation. Rajma, a staple in the north, especially in India, that has radiation. So you'll have to give up some of your maybe favorite foods and fruits and all that sort of stuff also. So that awareness is not there among most people. So that causes fear, I think.
No wonder Punjabis are crazy.
But but the issue comes is that with knowledge, one expects. Here's where I'm very pessimistic. One expects that with knowledge, the fear will go away. That is not necessarily the case. We have seen in many psychological experiments that people don't understand percentages and statistics that well. When I say that you have a 10% chance versus if I say 1 in 10, it's the same thing, when you look at it. But people respond differently to different things, the way it is presented. So if I tell you like, hey, look, if a reactor, reactors can't explode because for the simple reason that the enrichment of the uranium is not that high. There's no way a reactor can ever explode. Let's be very clear. But let us say, there's a reactor accident, and it's 1 in 10 trillion chances. But if it's something really goes wrong, like 1 million people can die. The million people can die sticks here in your head very easily. But risk is calculated. Everything in life has risk, and the way you calculate risk is what is the probability it will happen multiplied by the damage. And when you combine those two factors, nuclear risk becomes very small and very manageable. Is it 100% safe? No, but I really like to know what is 100% safe. I mean, coal, we obviously know what the problems are, and people think solar is very safe and wind is very safe. They have, issues, not just technological in terms of grid and all that, but look at the chemicals that are involved in the manufacturing of solar panels or the coating that these turbines are given. These are not safe either. Now, the issue, let me take this one step further. I'm going to anticipate a question, and if you don't ask me, then you should ask me anyway. Is nuclear waste?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question.
There we go. See, people say, what should we do about nuclear waste? And this is where the Indian model is really good. They are going to take the waste, they're going to put it in these fast breeders, which basically burns up the waste, and the waste comes down drastically. Now, why is nuclear waste from a light water reactor or a heavy water reactor? What makes it dangerous? You have a lot of these elements that are in the waste, which is long lasting. And their lifespan is something like 30,000 years. See, even the pyramids are 5,000 years old. So we can't imagine building something that can last for 30,000 years. And so this is something that scares people. Because look at the state of the pyramids after 2 or 3 renovations, they're still like this. How can we possibly keep nuclear waste safe for 30,000 years and with zero tolerance for any error, because the the radiation can leak? And let us say our civilization is over and some other civilization comes along and they don't know what it is. They go in there, they will die, basically. Right? So there are all these kinds of, when you're talking about time scales of 30,000, we really have to start talking about civilizations other than our own as well. Anyway, so that is one. In the Indian model, and to be fair, the molten salt reactors that the United States has been playing with in the 60s, and there is new interest now in Europe, in Norway especially, for example, and China also. What they does is they take that waste, they put it into a fast breeder reactor, and they put it through a thorium reactor in India, third stage. And by the time it goes through the entire cycle, the waste is substantially less, something like 90-95% less than the waste that was produced by the first reactor, light water, heavy water reactor. Secondly, what happens is the long-lasting radioactive elements are all burned up in the second and third phases. So you have these elements that last. You might want to keep them protected for only like 200 to 300 years rather than 20-30,000 years. So that's another thing. And when we talk about waste, we should also be very clear. We should not have in mind this picture of this huge mountain of nuclear waste, for example. Because the amount of nuclear waste that has been generated by the 400 plus reactors right now in the world, some 437, 430, whatever reactors, from the late 1950s until now, all these reactors in the world that are produced, will probably fill maybe one football pitch, maybe two football pitches. Not even two, sorry, one, maybe 1.5 football pitches at most. If you put them in barrels and just line them up, right? That's all it will fill. Because again, uranium is, because of the high energy density, what happens is a huge amount of energy is available at the burning of a very small quantity of fuel. In your palm, when you hold, if you hold 1 kilo of, let's say, pure uranium, I mean, don't do that, it'll kill you. But if you, hold a kilo of absolutely pure uranium or something, that can really, power a whole city for a few days. So, for that reason, the waste is not that much in the first place. The way it works is, normally when you have waste, you store it in the nuclear power plant itself for a while. You put it in underwater, you let the fuel elements cool down. And after that only, they'll put it in some silo in the plant. And when those silos are filled, they'll take it to a geological depository. No plant in the world has so far filled its own geological depositories. So we are pretty, comfortable with that yet. Now what they're doing is they're planning ahead, and that's why there's a lot of talk in the United States, especially in Scandinavia, about where to build these depositories. But honestly, you see, I think it's a waste to put the waste, so to speak, in the ground like that. Because the first phase, the light water or heavy water reactor, burns only 3% of the energy. When you put fuel in and you take it out, 97% of the energy is still in that fuel, that so-called waste. That is the reason you can take that waste and put it in a second and the third reactor, a fast breeder and a thorium reactor, and you can still get energy out of it. Because 97% is still there. So, it's not really waste. And, honestly speaking, if these countries think it's waste, I would love for them to just ship it over to India for free since it's waste. And, for waste disposal, they should pay us, and that'll be great. We'll get money as well as free fuel for our reactors, So, it's, again, waste is one thing. Safety, you might argue, we can go back and forth as how much is safe enough and that sort of stuff. But waste is absolutely not a problem for anybody who has, the slightest understanding of how nuclear technology works. We have very good ways of taking care of it. And, people say fast breeder reactors, by the way, when it comes to waste, they're just a dream. They're not. The Russians have commercially operated fast breeder reactors now. They've started recently. I think they have 2 running right now. And India is about to start. I mean, they've been saying this for a long time, to be fair. But now I think by the end of this year, I think they're probably planning on starting, and early next year it will go actually commercial. And that, shows that how close we are to achieving fast breeder success.
Oh, nice. Now I want to end the podcast. I want to make an observation first, and then probably you can also add a bit of it. Before that, I want to clarify it for the listeners. When I said I hate nuclear power, I was joking. Otherwise, I won't do this podcast if I did not believe in the technology. You never know in the day of social media. Anybody can say anything. So yeah, to me, after listening to you, to me, the biggest problem seems to be the perception associated with nuclear power, because what happens is, usually in psychology, they say, the more numbers you share with a person who's made up his or her mind, the more rigid they get in their perception. And obviously, when it comes to nuclear power, you have the famous Kudankulam incident, and there's this certain, I don't want to use left-leaning because in India, anybody can jump into anything as of now. But there is a certain lobby that has really pushed against nuclear power, and there is something about this fear with nuclear power. It's like, अरे इतने लोग मर सकते हैं, कोयले में हम धीरे धीरे मर रहे हैं, सोलर में हम धीरे धीरे मर रहे हैं, मगर इसमें एक झटके में इतने मर जाएंगे. How do you deal with that? That's what I wanted to end with.
See, here's the first thing. When I interact with people, whether it is at lectures I give, around Bangalore in my case, or when I write an article, or on social media or email, all these different media, the first thing is we have to see if we are sitting with a party that is only listening to you so that they can react to you, or basically tell you how you are wrong, or they're actually there to have a dialogue. Because I'm willing to accept that certain reactor designs might not be as good as other reactor designs. Some reactors might suit India, others might not. So somebody says, look, these are the reasons we don't want GE to come in, but Westinghouse is okay, whatever. Yeah, we can explore these things. Somebody says, look, costing, liability is important because of this. The way the Indians do liability is different from the way the rest of the world does it. But if somebody makes a case, we can listen, we can discuss. Most people, they've already made up their minds, and their point is, look, I have Googled it, I know what I'm talking about. And if that is the mindset, the conversation doesn't move forward. Now, what I've told you in this podcast, I've written on all of these issues before, and yet these people come back with the same sort of questions again. So I feel the conversation doesn't move forward. If I say this is a good technology, you say no, it's not because ABC, and I answer ABC, you have to come back and saying, okay, I've considered your answers, and now here is my further questions. If you go to somebody else and then repeat ABC, that is not good faith in any discussion. So when you ask me, how do I convince? I don't know. I am not a people person. So, I leave it to other people who can handle people better than I can. All I can do is I can, since I'm not a nuclear engineer, I can take, but I have training in engineering and nuclear also. I've done reactor design courses. I can take the science element, I can break it down into a way that a person who's actually interested in the subject can understand to that level, and I can write about it so that people can understand if they're interested in it. I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying nuclear is the perfect solution as it is right now, yet I think it is by far the best solution available. So, the issue comes with convincing, and this is something I see not just in India but everywhere, right? You say Kudankulam incident, for example. That's exactly it. I know from not personal experience, but I know people who have been in those negotiations where they said they go into a closed room. They just say, listen, we are not going to agree with you until you back off. Their point of negotiation is shut down Kudankulam. That is our negotiation. That's not negotiation. That's basically you're holding a gun to my head and saying, you do what I want. And, these people are being fed wrong information for, I don't know what reason. Maybe, I would like to believe, I don't want to believe that, my fellow humans are good people. But the point comes that I think these people might genuinely believe what they believe, many of them, and they're misled. And, if you believe in something very firmly, you have to first have an open mind. You have to be able to go access, do research, and understand. Nuclear technology is complicated, as are many issues that face the world today, or India today, let's say very clearly. I don't involve myself in the economic debate because I don't understand economics. I have no problem saying I don't understand it. I leave it to the experts. Same way, nuclear also requires a lot of reading. It requires a lot of engagement. It requires a lot of thought after the reading. You have to reflect on what that means. Not everybody can understand nuclear policy. Reading, even forget Wikipedia, reading 2 or 3 books are also not enough. It requires a serious amount of effort. And many people in their working lives will not have that level of time to commit to something like this. So that is something else. You have to have that humility to say, look, I don't understand this. I say this about economics. I say this about a lot of domestic politics. I say this about your videos. Okay. And I'm okay with that, because my point is, look, when you want to talk about Napoleon or the Roman Empire or nuclear, you can come to me. You want to talk about Israel, you can come to me. Don't ask me about other things like Brazil. It might be interesting, but that doesn't mean I have time for all of it. So this is the thing. How do I convince people? My first request would be for people who don't know to just shut up. Let the people who have more experience with this talk. You look at the sort of people who are making the biggest waves. One very big name in anti-nuclear sort of stuff is this Helen Caldicott. You know what she is? She's a pediatrist. I mean, I don't. Seriously, she says Dr. Helen Caldicott, and he's like, "Acha, doctor hai, engineer hai, या फिर PhD किया है? I mean, in maybe nuclear engineering or something." But then you look up her credentials, like, what is your, standing on this? How can you comment? See, again, you can be a banker who's made a lot of money. You can retire, dedicate, the next 15, 20 years of your, career which you quit now to studying something and coming up with stuff. That's fine. When you do that, it will show in the questions, in the way you express your questions, the answers you give. I watch her on YouTube for entertainment. That's how I, just sit there and giggle. Okay. But this is the thing. Again, And just because somebody has a nuclear engineering degree doesn't mean they have to know everything about these things, because many of these questions are about costs, about policy, and about society. They're not engineering questions. The engineering questions have been solved, and I think I have a lot of confidence that other complications that remain will be solved. That is the least of our worries with nuclear. The biggest question for us is, as a society, what is possible, what is not possible. Now, see, with nuclear, I don't think it is applicable everywhere. For example, you will want maybe 2 or 3 nuclear plants outside Bombay because you have 20 million people there. But if you go to a small village, in Karnataka or Haryana or wherever, which has, in India, a small village, let's say 10,000 people, right? A nuclear plant might be overkill. They don't need that kind of power. So you'll have to come up with something else there. So what the nuclear industry has done is they have these things called small modular reactors that don't generate a gigawatt of electricity. They generate maybe 50 megawatts or something like that. But that is not the only solution. There can be other solutions also. The question is, in that scenario, given climate, given use, given population, all these questions, as a society, it's a very complex process there.
You know what? You've said something very important in that, which is never going to happen. You have you have this expectation from people to not have an opinion in the day of social media.
I don't have that expectation. I'm just saying is I'll just ignore you if you don't make sense. Simple as that. Because I am tired of repeating the same arguments again and again. On Twitter, I have seen people, and the funny thing is the people who have the most difficult questions, challenges for nuclear energy are actually other nuclear people. Some of the people I follow, for example, either I follow or I follow them like they're on a list, on one of my lists I follow. You listen to some of their conversations, they're the guys who challenge it the most. They'll say, yeah, that might work in India, but it doesn't work in Australia. Sorry, it doesn't work for us, nuclear power in this case. That level of analysis, actually, I don't see from the anti-nuclear people that I see from these guys. The nuclear community is far more cognizant of the issues of cost, and they are working very hard to lower the cost as much as possible without sacrificing safety. At the same time, they do say that we don't have to be overly safe. There is something as too safe. At that point, the cost is crazy. To give you a simple example, like, a car, for example, I can make it so safe that even if you get into an accident, nothing will happen to you, right? But at that point, it'll probably cost as much as a tank, and it is no longer affordable. It's much cheaper for me to have a driving license and, make sure that you learn how to drive a car properly and hope that, you don't drink and drive, or, you don't have road rage. That's far cheaper for the entire world, and society as a whole, than having cars there where you're 100% safe. So same thing with nuclear energy. So my point is, getting specifically to your issue is, when people can have an opinion, but not all opinions are equal. This is something you have to understand. There's a fantastic book I reviewed called The Death of Expertise. That explains this very well. It is possible for the layman to sometimes, very rarely, have an opinion which is perhaps more accurate than that of a learned professor. That is not impossible. Statistically, it is possible. However, how much does that happen? People will look at that one example and say, professors don't know anything. Now, the thing is, if you look at the 500 other examples when the professor has been right and this fellow has been wrong, that shows you how much that is skewed. So, you can have an opinion. I mean, it's very difficult to not judge. People say, I don't judge. It's like, of course you do. You do. You just don't tell people. Okay? We are judgmental people, and that's fine. The point is, how do you deal with it? You ask me about, some politician in India, I have an opinion. I'll say, no, I don't like this guy, or I like this guy. Then you give me data, I'll say, yeah, I changed my mind. You're right. And that is the sign of, that's not the sign of a scholar, by the way. That is a sign of any intelligent person. Any person who interacts at an intellectual level, thinks, and before he responds, that is the first thing you have to do. So yeah, age of social media or not, my standards are very clear. If you're going to come and troll me, I'll just ignore you, block you, whatever, unless I see that there is some thought that has gone into your criticism.
To put the situation, I think it was the Kudankulam debate, and it was on Times Now. And I remember there was this scientist, I'm not sure if it was about Kudankulam, and then on the one side there was this NGO fellow yapping, and on the other side on the screen there was a scientist with his head on his face. That to me, pretty much summarizes the discussion in this country.
See, yeah, that you said that, and that reminds me of this other point. People always say that, the nuclear community has to reach out more. See, honestly, if you look at the efforts done by NPCIL and all that, see, I have a lot of issues with the Department of Atomic Energy, but there are some things they are doing well, and you have to give them credit for it. NPCIL, for example, during the Kudankulam thing, what they did is, like Amar Chitrakkatha style, they released a series of comics explaining nuclear energy. And that had a very calming effect on many of the villagers, apparently. So it is not that these guys don't reach out. The point comes is that, are you receptive to them? I'm not saying accept whatever they say. What I'm saying is, you go, you listen to what they say, go home, think about it, maybe read something else that counters their points. Go back to them and say, how do you answer this? We must question. There's nothing wrong with questioning, but at the same time, let us not question to waste time. Let us question to move the debate forward. I don't see anything that has moved the debate forward on nuclear. It's basically a bunch of people saying no and they're being stubborn. And this is something I've seen since the 60s. It's not new. It's just that nowadays, because of social media, we hear about it instantly. Whereas in the 60s, if some protest happened in England, it'll take us 3 days to hear about it in India. That's all.
And on that intellectual note, I would like to end this podcast. Hey, Jaideep, really, thanks a lot. We just touched the hour mark, and as we had decided, we actually packed a lot of, unpacked a lot of stuff in an hour. So thanks a lot, man.
Absolutely. And, if there are, like I said, because this is a very complicated topic, if your listeners do have questions, please feel free to contact me or do a second podcast or email me or whatever it is. My handle, which most people will not know, I'll spell it out for you, is ORSORAGGIANTE. It's on Twitter, Orso Raggiante. Feel free to contact and email, and I'll be happy to discuss.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.